In the summer of 1940, a pen became a lifeboat. On a quiet street in Kaunas, Lithuania, a line of strangers pressed toward a window, each carrying the same impossible request: let us live. Inside, a Japanese vice-consul, later called the Oscar Schindler of Japan, lifted his brush and chose to disobey. He had telegrams from Tokyo and a question from his conscience. What is a signature worth when the price is your career, your orders, your safety? Chun Sugihara decided to find out by writing his name again and again until the ink blistered and the train pulled away. This is the story of a man who turned bureaucracy into a rescue route and stamped hope onto paper. If you were told to say no while people knocked for their lives, how many names would you sign? 1. The consul in the window. Kaunas, Lithuania. Summer, 1940. It is the kind of light that forgives a city. Pale, unhurried, it slides down the stucco of the Japanese consulate and pools on a set of iron gates. On the other side of those gates, a line has learned the discipline of waiting. Men in loosened jackets, mothers counting children by touch. A boy teaches himself to be small. Inside, a man arranges his mourning. Chun Sugihara is tidy by habit, not temperament. He straightens a pen, then a stack of cables from Tokyo, already creased by his thumb. Kettle clicks, porcelain answers. The rituals are an armor, green tea, brush laid out, blotter squared to the desk. Against the one thing he cannot square, the sound of shoes on the pavement outside his window. That sound is an argument no telegram can silence. They will call him later, the Oscar Schindler of Japan, and the name will travel faster than the nuance. But in this room there is no nickname. There is only a career that has taught him to be fluent in other people's rules, and a mourning that asks him to consider breaking them. He picks up the top cable. The words are precise and unyielding. No visas without proper end visas. No visas without sufficient funds. No visas to those who cannot prove where they will go next. In the language of ministries, it sounds like order. In the language of the street outside, it may as well say, no air to those who cannot afford to breathe. It is not that Sugihara lacks respect for rules. He is a son of schoolmasters, a student of Russia, a man who made it to vice-consul by learning the delicate geometry of compromise. But he also knows what the trains have started in the West. He knows what people do when they run out of time. On the first morning the line appears, he watches from behind the lace curtain. He thinks about what a signature is, a small thing, ink and intention. It does not look like a rescue. It looks like handwriting. In the afternoons he walks to the gate. He speaks in the soft, formal Polish he learned years ago on assignments that seem now impossibly distant. He asks for names. He hears towns, Warsaw, Vilna, Lodz. The answers come wrapped in the economy of fear. Nobody tells the whole story. Everybody knows the whole story. There is a moment Gladwell might call the hinge. It does not announce itself. It is not cinematic, unless you count the way a hand hovers over a brush. As drama, a father, sunburnt across the nose, presses the edge of a passport into the iron bars, not trying to slip it through, just wanting the paper to be seen. For my daughter, he says, and he does not lift his eyes. There are 4 ink-smudged photographs glued crooked inside. One of them looks like a girl who has been told to be brave before she understands what brave is. That night, Yukiko hears the now familiar silence at dinner, the way his mind refuses to sit down, even when his body does. She massages his wrist and asks the small question, married people use when the real question is too large. Is your hand hurting again? He shrugs. He says that Tokyo is firm. He says the Soviets have grown impatient. He says the line will be larger in the morning. He does not say the sentence he is already arguing with. If I follow orders, they die. In the morning he brings the brush to his desk. It is a concession to a possibility. He cleans the nib. He tests the ink. The consulate clerk, a young man with careful posture, places a stack of blank transit forms beside him, as if passing ammunition. He writes the first name, then the second. The slow elegance of his hand looks almost like stubbornness if you do not know that this is the fastest he can go. Each line must be correct, each date, each transit city, each seal. He stamps with a deliberate force, as though reminding the paper, and himself, that this will hold. There is a rhythm to it. Lift the brush. Pull the line. Breathe. Lift the brush. Pull the line. Breathe. Outside the window, the line adjusts to the sound of salvation, made repetitive. Hope can learn a metronome. By midday his tea has cooled untouched. The clerk brings water and forgets to leave. He stands with his back to the door, eyes divided between the desk and the gate. He will later tell people that he watched the vice-consul's hand cramp and refused to stop, the way a runner's legs refuse, when the finish is still miles away. It is not an act of bravado. It is bureaucracy inverted. Sugihara does not declare anything. He signs. He does the smallest thing he can do over and over until the accumulation of small things becomes a corridor through a continent. People will ask him years later why he did it. They will hope for a speech. He will offer them a sentence. They needed help, he will say. I just did what had to be done. But this morning, before the humility, before the legend, before the plaque on a tree at Yad Vashem, there is only a man deciding that the rules must tolerate his conscience, that his name belongs with their futures, not with a cable. The calls go out from his desk to the rail office, to the ticket agent who will look the other way if the papers look almost right, to the Soviet officials who have learned to appreciate precision and deference. He speaks their language, he mirrors their posture, he respects their protocols, until he cannot. The trick is not to announce defiance. The trick is to make defiance look like compliance. Everyone missed. Once that week, a storm moves in early. Rain unthreads the line and then knits it tighter. Bodies press shoulder to shoulder to keep the papers dry. A woman uses her own scarf to cover the corners of a stranger's passport. Inside, the vice-consul keeps writing. The nib scratches like a soft saw, cutting through something you cannot see, but you can hear yielding. There is a boy. There is always a boy in stories like these. But this one is real, and he will grow to be a man who explains to his grandchildren how ink changes the direction of a life. He remembers the smell of the consulate's hallway, soap and damp wool. He remembers the way the Japanese man's wrist moved. He remembers the stamp. He remembers walking away lighter, though nothing in his hands had changed weight. When he finally pauses, late, with the room dimming around the edges, Sugihara looks at the stack of passports waiting, and the smaller stack completed. Arithmetic mocks intention. It is not enough. It will not be enough. And yet, morning will come, and he will begin again, and the corridor he is drawing across a map will stretch from this desk to Vladivostok, from Vladivostok to Kobe, from Kobe to a place where a child can sleep without being counted. We prefer our heroes decisive, singular. We like them to fit into a phrase, Japan's Schindler. because it is comforting to believe that courage comes labelled. But the truth on this morning is plainer and maybe braver. A diplomat hears the rules and recognizes that rules are not moral by virtue of being rules. He looks out at a line of strangers and decides his signature can be a kind of shelter. This is what a hinge feels like when it turns. No trumpets, no speech, just a brush lifted, a name written, and the quiet understanding that a career may be ending while a life is beginning. 2. The telegrams from Tokyo. They arrive like weather. Grey envelopes with a government smell, ink and starch and a hint of distance. The clerk brings them in, stacked and banded, and waits for Sugihara to nod before he retreats to the doorway. A sentry to the gate and to the room at once. The first cable is courteous in that particular way. Ministries are courteous, absolute and polite. No visas without end visas. No visas without proof of funds. No visas for the ones who cannot prove tomorrow. It reads like a list of rules. Outside the rules are hunger, rumour, and the sometimes sound of boots. Sugihara reads it once, then again, as if the words might soften on a second pass. He takes up his pen and drafts a reply in the flat, careful language he learned for exactly this, how to argue without seeming to. He asks Tokyo to consider the exceptional circumstances in Kaunas. He notes the volume. He suggests that transit, by definition, is motion, and motion does not always carry certificates. He does not write the sentence that is beginning to live under all the others. If not us, then who? The answer returns quickly, quicker than courtesy. Usually moves, refuse. The signature at the bottom is a bureaucrat's seal, authoritative, specific, and safe behind a desk 3,000 miles away. Sugihara stares at it longer than he needs to, not because he doubts the authority, but because he is testing its weight against the sound of shoes outside his window. Afternoon. He steps out to the gate. The line lifts its eyes without lifting its voices. He has learned the rhythms of these conversations, the way men hold themselves a little taller when they say, "for my family," the way women put their bodies between the smallest children and the wind, the way teenagers refuse to be children or adults, depending on who is watching. He says what he can say truthfully, that he is doing everything he can. He omits the rest. That is the etiquette of hope. You say only what can be borne. At home the Cables come to dinner with him. They sit in his silence between rice and tea. Yukiko has the gentleness of long practice. She lets quiet be a room they can both walk through without bumping. Later she will say she recognized the look, how he stared not at a thing, but through it, as if measuring a bridge that didn't exist yet. She needs his hand as if the problem is muscle and not moral. Night brings more telegrams because policy sleeps well. He reads them under a lamp that makes its own island of light. The clerk has long since gone. The street outside has thinned to the late watch, and yet the Cables continue. Repeat directives, refuse, do not deviate. The sentences line up like soldiers across the page. There is a window of time in which a man tries to make himself fit the world. He tries to contort into the shape of the rule. He asks himself whether mercy can be procedural, whether there is a memo he has not yet written in the right cadence that will unlock permission. He writes again, requesting clarity. He receives clarity. In the morning, a boy appears at the front of the line, with a note written in a careful adult hand, his parents' names, his own, the address of a cousin in Kobe that may or may not hold. The boy keeps folding and unfolding the note as if notes can become heavier with attention. "Sir," he says, and waits for the rest of his courage to arrive. Sugihara gestures to the door and brings him inside, because sometimes the most radical thing a diplomat can do is keep a child out of the rain for 10 minutes. He signs 2 more visas before noon. It is a pattern now, a cable, a decision, a signature. He is not reckless, he is meticulous. He writes names so legibly that the future will be forced to read them. Tokyo answers his latest request with a longer message, the kind of language that believes itself humane because it explains. It speaks of international obligations, of not offending host nations, of the importance of consistent policy. It does not mention daughters or boys with notes, or the way fear makes hands shake when they pass a passport through a window. It does, however, mention consequences. It reminds him, politely, of his position. It asks, without asking, who he thinks he is. He does not think he is anyone special. That is the problem and the solution. Heroes often begin as people who do not believe in the category. He is a vice-consul in a small office in a city not known for heroes. Wearing a tie he has worn too many times, drinking tea that has gone room temperature, staring at a stack of paper that could turn into lives if he lets it. He is later the Oscar Schindler of Japan, but that title lives in futures and headlines. Here he is a man holding a brush in a room with a door that opens to a line. Midweek, the Soviets knock, a functionary with a hat too stiff for the weather, and a face that has been trained out of expression. Papers are checked, questions are asked. Is the consulate observing regulations? Are there irregularities? The conversation is cordial, in the way a chess match is cordial, smiles over moves designed to corner. Sugihara presents his ledger, his stamps. The perfect geometry of his bureaucracy. The functionary leaves with the impression that everything is in order, and the suspicion that order here has been taught new meanings. Back at the desk, he drafts one more cable. It is not a plea this time, not exactly. It is a migration of responsibility in the form of a question. In light of the humanitarian crisis and the exigencies of transit, does the ministry authorize measured exceptions? He sends it knowing the answer. He sends it anyway, because rituals matter, because the archive should show that someone asked the right thing at the right time. The reply lands like a lid: refuse, adhere to regulations, cease discretionary issuance. The stamp is hard and clean. He places the cable beside the others and looks at the little mountain of certainty rising on his desk, each sheet a layer of official indifference. He thinks of sandbags and floods that do not respect them. It is late when he tells Yukiko. He does not dramatize. He is not a dramatist. He says, "They have answered again." She pours more tea, though neither of them wants it, and that is marriage. The ceremony performed for the sake of steadiness. "What will you do?" she asks, and it is not a challenge. It is an invitation for him to say aloud what both of them already know. He studies his hand as if it belongs to someone else. The knuckles are a little inflamed. There is a small crescent of dried ink near the base of his thumb. "I will continue," he says, and the sentence does not swell in the air or clap itself on the back. It just sits there, inevitable as weather. She nods. She wraps his wrist with a cool cloth. There are vows that come after wedding vows, made in kitchens over cooling tea. The next morning the clerk arrives early to find the vice-consul already at the desk, coat off, sleeves neat, the brush making a patient sound against paper. The clerk does not ask for instructions. He becomes a choreography, in, out, gate, door, stamp pad re-inked, the quiet efficiencies of a small rebellion. Word travels in ways cables cannot track. Refugees tell one another in low voices. The Japanese at the corner will help you if you have a passport. If you do not have a passport. If you can say Kobe as if it were a promise. Names enter his office that will one day appear on family trees in cities he has never seen. He does not see those trees. He sees the line. He sees the rain when it comes, and the dust when it doesn't. He sees the way hope changes posture, when it believes it might be allowed to live. The ministry keeps writing. He keeps writing. Two scripts running in parallel, one that insists on the primacy of rules, one that insists on the primacy of breath. He tries as long as he can to keep the two from colliding in a way that will injure more than himself. He chooses his language carefully, his roots carefully, his allies carefully. He tells the clerk, without telling him, how to answer a door when a certain knock sounds. He asks the rail agent to look kindly at a date that seems misaligned. He asks nothing of the line except patience he knows they no longer own. There is a moment, small as hinges are, easy to miss, when he folds the latest cable in half and slides it under the blotter instead of into the file. He lines up his next form. He writes another name. It is not a declaration. It is a practice. Years later, when people ask him to explain the drama, he will shrug the story down to a sentence. But if you want to find the drama, it is here, in a room warmed by a single lamp, with rain pressing against the window, with orders circling like crows and a man who keeps his head bent to the page. The tension is not between a hero and a villain. It is between ink and instruction, between the language of a ministry and the language of a line. He chooses his language, he signs it. 3. The first signature. It begins with a detail so small it could be a mistake, the way he draws the loop of the G in his family name. Sugihara. The ink pools, then thins. He lifts the brush, breathes, and places it down again. On a different line, a different name, a different life. There are beginnings that arrive like thunder. This one arrives like handwriting. The office is a choreography now. The clerk at the door, the bell that rings when the gate opens, the soft thud of the stamp as it meets paper. The line outside learns to listen. For the thud, as if it were the starting gun of a sprint through a continent. When the stamp hits, bodies tilt forward. When it pauses, the street holds its breath. He is careful with everything, the forms, the seals, the dates that must pretend to line up with trains that may not. He writes routes like narrow bridges, Kaunas to Moscow to Vladivostok, to Kobe. He knows the bridge will sway. He builds it anyway. There is a man in a grey hat who insists he has a visa to Curaçao. He does not. He has a note that says, "No visa is required for Curaçao, only the governor's permission." The difference between a visa and not a visa is the difference between a door and a sentence. Across town, a Dutch businessman with a rubber stamp has begun writing the word Curaçao into the world as if the island itself could be a raft. They will not meet properly, these two men, the Dutchman and the Japanese vice-consul, but their ink will. Between them, a fiction becomes a corridor that proves itself true because people walk it. By noon, the pen bites back. His hand complains in small spasms, muscles rising like knots of rope under the skin. He sets the brush down. Yukiko is there, as if she has been there all day, which in a way she has, moving through rooms, gathering rumors, answering the door with tea for people who come asking for anything kindness will give. She wraps his wrist with a cloth dipped in water gone cool. "Rest," she says, and he nods, and they both understand that rest is a sentence without a period. He signs. He signs the way a baker makes bread at dawn, again, until repetition becomes skill and skill becomes devotion, not zeal. He is not a zealot. He is a civil servant whose civility is refusing to let procedure be the last word. He slows when he is tempted to hurry. Hurry makes mistakes, and mistakes cost more than time. Outside, the air changes. August presses a thumb against the city. Children who were quiet become restless, and then quiet again, in that way of children who understand they are part of an adult's crisis. A woman faints and recovers on the courage of strangers. A young man gives up his place in line to an older one, and then gets it back, because the older one will not let the trade stand. There are ethics that only appear when there is not enough to go around. He keeps the door cracked to hear the weather in the line. When there is a lift of panic, for a rumor of a Soviet inspection, for a police wagon rattling over the stones, he adjusts pace without announcing it. He stands to stamp, sits to write, stands to stamp. The clerk learns to swap in pads before the ink runs thin, to angle the papers so the seal catches clean. Small perfections keep larger failures away. Mid-afternoon, a man comes with a violin case. It is not a violin. It is his family's documents and a photograph wrapped in a handkerchief. He holds the case as if weight could be dignity. When the stamp lands, he bows, not to the man behind the desk, but to the sound. He understands that the sound means movement. Movement means a chance. In the hall, on a chair by the umbrella stand, the boy with the note waits again. Today he has a different note, thicker paper, lines ruled with a schoolmaster's hand. He has written his name at the top, large, as if a large name holds better. He watches the door not for his turn, but for the moment when the lamp inside is turned on, the day consenting to become evening. When it does, he smiles without meaning to. He has decided that a lit lamp is luck. There is no announcement, there is no speech, but every signature increases the volume of a quiet rebellion. Word travels in rumor and in certainty. The Japanese will help you. The Japanese will help you if your papers are wrong. The Japanese will help you even if you have no papers. None of those sentences is entirely true. All of them are true enough to create a wave. Kaunas learns to root its fear to a door with a black plaque. He breaks to write a cable in the afternoon's white heat, the kind of formal paragraphing that has become its own theatre. He explains again the situation. He posits urgency without accusation. He prepares himself to be refused. He has stopped waiting for permission, but he continues to perform the ritual of asking because rituals keep a man honest about what he is breaking. When the answer returns, refuse, adhere to regulation, he slips the paper under the blotter without looking up. Then he signs another visa. He has invented a way to obey the spirit of a thing by subverting its letter, and he will live with the risks that come with that kind of invention. Twilight oils the street. The clerk lights the hallway lamps. Shadows lengthen into familiar shapes. The post, the gate, the curve of the neighbor's balcony. A couple enters together and leaves separately to make room for superstition. If you disperse hope, it cannot be taken all at once. Yukiko brings bread torn into pieces small enough to eat in line. One of the men refuses and then takes it, and then weeps, suddenly, at the fact of bread. He signs through the weeping. He signs through the knock at the back door. someone with information about a train, through the long quiet when the line has thinned, and what remains is only the tremor in his hand. He signs when the ink runs light, and then dark again. He signs until the page numbers of the forms begin to feel like a countdown. He refuses to reach 0 on. When he finally stops, it is not a decision. It is the room going dim, and his wrist saying no. He leans back, blinks away the blur. On the desk, 2 stacks, one alive, one waiting. The waiting stack is taller. It will always be taller. Arithmetic again. He writes a note for the morning. The clerk's tasks, the seal that needs replacing. The name of the Soviet border official who smiles like a man who has taught himself not to get involved, and might, under the right conditions, get involved. At home, he folds his day small so he can carry it upstairs. Yukiko unpacks it without questions. The muscle that seizes, the child whose name he cannot forget, the ledger line that pretends to keep count of mercy. On the table, his pen rests in a dish as if it were a living thing. They eat quietly, the way you eat when the body needs food, and the mind needs something else entirely. There is a point, if you were to graph it, where a man moves from considering to committing. It is invisible from the street. It looks like a light left on later than usual. It sounds like a stamp. It feels inside the hand that holds the brush, like certainty arriving without flourish. He has crossed that point. Tomorrow he will bring a second pen. Tomorrow the line will be longer. Tomorrow he will keep writing until the evening train tells him it is time to stop, and even then he will test the train's patience. Years later people will call this bravery, as if bravery were something a person picks up like a coat. He will not argue because there is nothing to be gained by arguing with gratitude. But this is what it was, choosing on an ordinary afternoon in a small room to let ink behave like a boat. 4. The river of names. They come in currents. Warsaw first, a surge of families carrying addresses like talismans, names of cousins whispered as if the sound itself might open a door. Vilna, with its scholars who fold papers with the precision of people who believe order can save them. Minsk, a rougher tide, shoulders squared against the wind, the way men square against a verdict. The street learns to speak many cities at once. Inside the desk is a sluice. Names enter, become lines, become stamps, become routes. Kaunas to Moscow, to Vladivostok, to Kobe. A geography remade in ink. The clerk has begun to hear the rhythm, the way a certain hesitation means forged papers, the way a certain burst of breath means someone has finally found the word Curaçao and is trying it on like a coat. There is a Dutchman across town with a rubber stamp and a brave interpretation of colonial permissions. Between the Dutch stamp and the Japanese signature, a raft assembles itself and learns to float. Some documents are careful lies. Sugihara reads them the way a surgeon reads an X-ray, looking for the fracture that will break the body if he presses too hard. He does not punish lies that are trying to keep children alive. He writes along their edges, strengthening them where they will be tested, dates, destinations, the kind of details that impress a bored official into letting a paper pass. Outside the window, rain begins as rumor and becomes weather. The line does not dissolve, it compacts. A woman who has lost one glove shares the other with a stranger's child, pinching fingers together under wool to keep warmth from escaping. A man removes his hat not as courtesy, but as faith. If his head is bare, perhaps the world will see him better. People invent tiny rituals because rituals feel like control. He places the seal, family crest set into brass, and presses down with the patience of a craftsman who knows the tool. matters as much as the hand. There is a moment when the crest catches the light, a small flare on the curve of the stamp. He does not notice it anymore. Others do. They will describe it later, after they have crossed continents, as the glint that meant the stamp took, that the paper became a passport, and the passport became a path. Midweek, a rabbi arrives with a list. It is a column of names written in a hand too steady for the hour. He speaks softly in the syntax of someone used to teaching. He explains that some of these are students, some fathers, some men who will be expected to lead, even if they have only ever followed. Sugihara listens, because listening is part of the work. He does not ask how many the list will save. That is not a question a list can answer. There are tensions the room learns to hold. The Soviets want order and the appearance of consent. Tokyo wants adherence and the appearance of discipline. The line wants breath and the appearance of nothing. Sugihara gives each one what they think they want, long enough to give the line what it actually needs. He is not tricking anyone. He is translating. Yukiko moves like a quiet weather system through the day, gathering names when names are lost, straightening collars that have decided to collapse, passing tea to hands that would shake if left unoccupied. She does not ask for stories, but stories arrive anyway, wrapped in sentences that begin with logistics and end with confession. She learns, before he does, that gratitude has its own weight. It sits in people's shoulders after the stamp, heavier than fear and lighter than grief, and they are not sure where to put it. The boy with the note is now a boy, with a stamped passport. His face is a lesson in what relief looks like, before it learns how to smile. He lingers in the hallway, tracing the crest with a finger, as if touching proof will keep proof from evaporating. "Thank you," he tells the clerk, then Yukiko, then the door itself. He runs his hand over the wood grain, a blessing for the tree he has decided grew here for him. Word travels with a speed that makes policy look slow. Lines form at dawn, lines stay into dusk. A man arrives having walked all night from a town whose name yields a soft consonant even when spoken hard. He has no papers. He has a mother's photograph folded into a prayer. He waits 3 hours in a posture too proud for pleading and then pleads. Sugihara calls him forward before his turn, because sometimes rules, his rules not Tokyo's, must bow to time's imprecision. He stamps until the stamp pad dries, and then stamps again after the clerk, takes a breath and re-inks. He stamps through the quiet exchange at the gate, when a Soviet officer looks in, sees an orderly geometry of lines and ledgers, and decides to admire the geometry rather than question what it is measuring. He stamps when the floorboards creak, in a way that suggests the building would prefer fewer people inside it. He stamps when the lamp warms the glass and clouds it at the edges, making the world soft and the paper sharp. Late afternoon brings a small crisis, a family with 2 passports and 3 children. There is arithmetic that cannot be improved by argument. Sugihara counts and then stops counting and then writes. He writes the names. He writes the destinations. He writes dates that will ask the rail clerk to be kind. He stamps, a little harder than usual, as if pressure could force permission into the world. The father begins to cry in the way men try not to, silent, disassembled, eyes turned to the floor, as if tears cannot fall fast, if the head is held low. "Go," Sugihara says, and understands the cruelty of a single word that asks for everything. There is a whisper that begins to follow him, Japan's Schindler. It is a phrase designed to make courage legible to people who prefer familiar stories. He hears it without approving and without rejecting. It will help the line hold its nerve. It will never help him hold his hand steady. He returns to the brush. He prefers nouns to nicknames. Ink, paper, name, stamp, train. Evening pulls the street long. The last signatures of the day have a gravity. The first ones did not. He slows. He does not want to make a mistake at tiredness. He lines the forms, checks the dates, breathes between letters. Outside, someone begins to hum. Not a tune anyone knows, not exactly, but a pattern meant to keep breath organized. Hope, in its simplest form, is a way of holding air. He stops only when the room insists. The lamp is a halo and a warning. The clerk has become a silhouette set to the task of turning keys. The door gains its night weight. On the desk, the river of names has widened and found a channel. Each stamped paper a small boat pressed into the current, pointed east. He stands finally and feels the ache unfurl. In his wrist like an accusation, and then, surprisingly, like a benediction. In the hallway, Yukiko waits with the cool cloth. She wraps his hand without saying anything, because words are a resource today and must be spent carefully. He closes his eyes. He can still hear the line. It is not outside. It is inside now. A sound his body will carry to bed. Tomorrow it will be louder. Tomorrow there will be more boats. Tomorrow the river will run again. When a river learns its path, who is allowed to stop it? 5. The border closing. It comes as a notice, not a knock. A paper folded into authority, delivered by a man whose hat has learned to be stern. The consulate will close. The vice-consul will depart. The city, newly rearranged by Soviet geometry, has no room for extraneous doors. Sugihara reads it standing. There are orders that prefer to be read on your feet. The clerk watches the way the room tilts, as if furniture can feel a deadline. Outside, the line does not yet know. Lines are beautiful that way. They trust tomorrow until someone tells them not to. He packs, because packing is what people do when told to leave. Shirts folded into squares. Papers into a case that looks too small for what it must hold. Yukiko places the brush into its wooden sleeve, as if putting a child to sleep. He writes 3 visas before the suitcase closes, because even the rituals of departure can be asked to wait. The last days have a sharpened edge. The Soviets count hours with a bureaucrat's precision. The line counts them with a heart's chaos. Word spreads in uneven waves. Go now, today, hurry. Men arrive with faces that have forgotten how to postpone urgency. Women write children's names on scraps and pin them inside coats. The clerk moves like a metronome, set too fast and still somehow steady. Inside the office, the stamps sound different, harder, final. He signs with the care of someone chiseling letters into stone he knows will outlast him. The title people have begun to whisper. Japan's Schindler floats at the edges of the room like a newspaper headline that hasn't been printed yet. He does not turn to look at it. Titles do not line up trains. On the morning of departure, the building knows. Floorboards give a low complaint. The door resists and then relents. He leaves the office key on the desk, a small ceremony for a room that has behaved like a harbor. Then he does a thing that looks like indecision and is not. He takes the stamp. He takes the seal. He takes a stack of forms. There are tools that belong to a man, until they belong to everyone. The platform at Kaunas is iron and impatience. Trains hiss like animals warned awake. Families surge not toward him, but toward possibility. He and Yukiko find their carriage. The suitcase slides under a bench. The clerk, out of uniform now, stands a little away, pretending distance and hoping proximity. The engine yawns, time thins. He sits by the window and opens the case. Forms, pen, pad. A shape the line recognizes even here. A woman sees him first, then a man. Then the rumor leaps tracks. The Japanese will sign. The Japanese will sign now. People press forward with a choreography that invents itself. He leans out, the window a frame, for a scene no one wrote, and everyone will remember. Passports rise like a field finding the wind. He takes one, signs, stamps, returns, takes another, signs, stamps, returns. The conductor, affronted by the audacity of mercy, makes a noise that is not quite a protest. Yukiko steadies the stack, feeds him paper, as if feeding breath. The clerk becomes a channel, hand to hand, document to window, hope to signature and back again, until the platform is a kind of tide. The train lurches once, twice. Impatience made mechanical. People stumble and steady, their arms learning the physics of desperation. He keeps signing. He does not look at the clock, because clocks have nothing useful to say now. When the engine finally insists, when steel decides to leave, he leans farther, shoulders against the frame, the brush still moving. Ink making promises even as motion threatens to break them. He signs until the angle defeats him, until his wrist cannot outrun the train's geometry, until faces become shapes through glass that is suddenly the whole world. A man shouts a thank you that the wind takes and returns as something else. A girl holds her passport to her chest, as if pressure can weld paper to future. The platform recedes, not as distance but as consequence. Inside, the carriage is ordinary, in the way a miracle dislikes. Seats, hooks, a smell of coal and cloth. Yukiko wraps his hand because habits should not fail a person just because the world is ending. He closes his eyes and sees the glint of the seal, the curve of the G, the river of names he has pushed east. There is quiet now, but not rest. He has performed a paradox, obeyed departure while refusing to stop working. The window has taught him a lesson about thresholds. Borders are inventions. Corridors are decisions. He has decided. The train carries them away from the gate. The visas carry others toward it. In the ledger of compromises, this one feels like a line he can live with. When the city finally unthreads behind them, he opens his eyes and looks at Yukiko the way a man looks at the person who knows the worst truth about him and doesn't think it is the worst, that he will break rules when rules require breaking. She nods, one of those small absolute nods that spouses use to bless a future neither of them can name. He breathes. He does not say the thing in his chest, that a window, once opened, teaches a hand not to forget the shape of light. If the world told you to close the door and you had a window, which would you use? 6. The journey east. Ink becomes motion. That is the miracle and the math. A stamp pressed in a small room in Kaunas begins to pull bodies across the largest country on earth. Morning trains swallow families whole and spit them out into stations that rhyme with their fear. Minsk, Smolensk, Moscow. Names that sound like punctuation in a sentence too long to comprehend. The corridor he drew is narrow, but it holds. Tickets acquired with the help of a clerk who knows which desk to visit after lunch. A Soviet officer who admires clean lines and lets clean lines pass. A timetable that behaves like a promise, if you don't look too hard. The visas say what they need to say. Transit through Japan. The papers do not mention courage. The rails assume it. On the trains, children learn a new game. Count the forests. Count the men in hats who do not look at you. Count the days by bread. A mother breathes onto a window and writes a single letter in the fog, then wipes it away before anyone can translate love into suspicion. A father invents humor at 2 a.m. to make fear gentle enough for a 6-year-old. The jokes are not good, they are generous. At border stations, officials check papers with a boredom that can be negotiated. The ink looks important, the crest catches light. Sugihara, one says, rolling the syllables as if they are a new coin. He stamps. He stamps not because he believes the paper, but because the paper believes itself. So convincingly that belief becomes function. Moscow is a pause, not a rest, a city of corridors and instructions. Refugees move through it like water being asked to remember walls. They sleep sitting up on benches with armrests designed to prevent sleep. They guard their small bags with large seriousness. Somewhere in the middle of the noise, a rumor arrives like a hand on the shoulder. Vladivostok, east. If you keep moving, the ocean will give you a choice. Night trains teach a new arithmetic, kilometers and courage, hunger and relief, hours and the way a body accepts discomfort as doctrine. A violin appears, and then a melody. It wakes a child and quiets a woman. There is no applause at the end. There is a nod from a man who used to know composers by name, and now knows only the name on his passport. Siberia does not care who is on the train. It is not cruel. It is indifferent. Snow advertises itself even in August, in drifts on the imagination. A boy learns the word tiger and decides it is a friendly word, whether or not it is. Families eat the fruit that bruises last. Bread is currency and kindness both. A pair of sisters trade bites as if trading could make 2 halves into more than a whole. Some papers are almost papers. Dates lean, destinations improvise. The Dutch stamp for Curaçao shows up like a talisman no one planned to believe and everyone is grateful for. Between Kaunas and Vladivostok, fabricated islands become actual bridges because people walk them. Bureaucracy, bent correctly, can become benevolence. At Tostok, the ocean is an argument that looks like mercy. The station is iron and shouting. Porters invent rules and abandon them in the span of a minute. A man sells oranges that taste like the idea of sunlight. Papers are checked again and again until checking becomes theatre and the actors grow tired. The visas say Japan. The officials point to ships and tell people which ones are not meant for them and which ones might be. The boat to Kobe smells like engine and salt and meals carried in pails. The sea makes mothers hold children as if holding could steady water. An old man recites the names of his teachers, each syllable a small prayer cast over the wake. Someone finds humor again, less forced this time, the kind that arrives when peril goes horizontal and becomes waves. Japan is not a promise, it is a place. Kobe makes its case with wooden houses and streets that run their logic to the shore. The first nights are in rooms with tatami that teach feet to be quiet. The visas have done their work. They are ink rendered into floor and roof, and a temporary address that allows people to sleep without being counted by strangers. There is a moment at the consulate in Kobe when a clerk looks up from a ledger and understands it. The path that began at a desk in Kaunas has brought a tide to his door. He does not know the vice-consul's wrist cramps. He does not know the train window. He knows only that names are arriving with the same crest pressed onto paper. He aligns forms. He asks questions that are meant to be answered simply and are. From Japan, the corridor bends again. Shanghai, Tientsin. Ports with futures in them. The visas are transit, but transit can be extended if the story is told correctly, and the teller has slept recently. Communities rearrange themselves overnight, like chessboards shaken and then set right. Rabbis find students, parents find cousins. Strangers decide not to be strangers. Survival changes kinship. Ink changes geography. Not everyone makes this journey. Some go west against advice and disappear into snow that refuses to confess. Some are delayed until delay becomes a wall. But thousands, families threaded together by signatures, step onto docks and into streets that have not yet learned their names and begin teaching them. The sound of a stamp becomes other sounds, markets, children inventing games with borrowed words, Sabbath candles lit in rooms whose walls were not designed for that kind of light. He hears pieces, a letter pass through the proper hands. A traveller who returns with the privacy of gratitude. A rumour that the corridor holds, that more have crossed, that paper can be a rope if you throw enough of it across a canyon. He does not compile reports. He sketches, in his head, a map whose lines are not published but are true. Yukiko imagines faces in cities she has never seen, the way a person imagines constellations in unfamiliar skies. She does not know their names. She knows the sound a stamp makes when it turns a future from maybe into likely. At night, in rooms that are now temporary in new ways, she rests his wrist against cool porcelain and tells him a story he likes, that there is a child somewhere, tonight, sleeping on a bench that does not smell like fear. Titles follow him, whether he invites them or not. Japan's Schindler, shorthand for people trying to honor a man, with a language they recognize. He lets the phrase pass like weather. In the ledger that matters to him, the rows are simple: name, route, date, stamp, ship, city. He has learned that the drama is not in the label. It is in the fact that a brush drew a line across continents, and people found it, kept it, and moved. If ink can cross an ocean, what else have we been underestimating? 7. The price of compassion. There is no arrest, no dramatic summons, just a series of doors that no longer open when he knocks. Prague first, then Bucharest, postings that feel like the after-echo of a career, sound without center. Letters from Tokyo grow cooler the way tea does when left to think. He has learned the rhythm of orders. He recognizes now the rhythm of being set aside. In Bucharest he keeps a neat office because neatness is a form of dignity. He answers cables that do not ask. He drafts reports no one reads. The war finishes its arc and flings debris. There are days when he walks to the river and counts barges to keep from counting what cannot be counted. He thinks of the line in Kaunas, not the faces, not even the names, but the noise of hope arranged into a queue. Memory prefers sound over detail when the heart is tired. Home is Japan, but the word lands differently now. The ministry calls it downsizing. The timing calls it something else. He comes back to a country that has been thinned and reshelved. In a small room with polite chairs, a man with an apologetic mouth explains the new reality. Thank you, service. We will not be needing more of it. Sugihara bows the way a person bows when they refuse to let humiliation own their spine. He signs a paper to end a life of signing. Then survival. Not the cinematic kind, the grocery list kind. He sells light bulbs door to door because light is, at least, a concept he respects. He rehearses a pitch that becomes, in his mouth, a prayer for small illuminations. He wears a suit too formal for the job because dignity should be stubborn. Some doors close, some open. A housewife buys 2 bulbs and looks puzzled at the manners of a man who says thank you like a diplomat and bows as if the bulbs are precious goods. Yukiko learns new arithmetic. Rice measured to the cup, to the half. Patches sewn where patches will hold longer than new cloth. She does not complain. She stands at the sink with her hands in water and thinks of the other sinks other women stand at, in cities whose names reach them on ship manifests and rumors. She imagines those women too, measuring their rice, and decides this is how fate apologizes. By giving you a task, you can do well. Neighbors ask, in the way neighbors ask, what he did in the war. He gives them the outline, never the story. He is wary of becoming his own headline. The title has begun to find him, Japan's Schindler, brought back by travelers and letters and the kind of conversation that happens over tea when someone says, "Have you heard?" He accepts the kindness inside the label and leaves the rest on the saucer. There is a boy, their son, who asks once, carefully, whether disobedience is a family trait. Sugihara laughs, not because it is funny, but because the question is correct. "It depends," he says. "On what you are disobeying," the boy nods, as if given a rule and not a riddle. Years later he will understand he was given both. At night his wrist still aches in a way that has nothing to do with tendons. Pain remembers what purpose taught it. Yukiko wraps it in cloth, as she did in Kaunas, and the gesture pulls a thread through time. "Do you regret it?" she asks once. Not because she doubts, but because she knows a person needs to say the answer aloud to trust it. He shakes his head. "They needed help," he says. The sentence he favors because it is small enough to fit in any room. There are returns that arrive like birds you fed once and forgot. A letter finds them, a woman, now a mother, writing from a city whose skyline they have never seen, explaining that she lights candles on Friday nights for a life that would not have stretched this far without a stamp. Then a knock, a man on a work trip who has arranged his itinerary around a visit to an address written in an old notebook. He stands in their doorway and struggles with language. In the end he bows. Sometimes gratitude has to be quiet to be bearable. He takes jobs that seem, to anyone watching from the outside, built from pieces of a life that won't assemble. He copies documents, translates, consults. The way a retired violinist might tune other people's instruments. The great halls are gone. The ear remains. In each small task, he tries to keep the same measure. Do the next right thing as cleanly as you can. It is a discipline that outlives applause. Honor, when it comes, takes years to find the address. An invitation from a place he once only knew as a word spoken by desperate men at his gate. Jerusalem, stories have been traveling without him, growing their own legs, their own light. He and Yukiko stand under trees that belong to other histories and listen as names are read, as if they are tinder catching. He bows when people clap, because clapping is a language, and he remains always a linguist. At home afterward, the bulbs still need selling. The rent still needs paying. Recognition does not fix arithmetic, but it alters the temperature of a life. Letters come, and with them a truth he never demanded and cannot entirely receive. The corridor held. The river of names did not evaporate. It made a sea. Not all prices are paid in scandal. Some are paid in quiet rooms with modest furniture, and the willingness to accept that a life can be both ordinary and decisive. He sits at the table where he once spread visas and spreads, now bills and school notices, and a newspaper folded to the crossword. Yukiko pours tea. Outside, a boy runs past laughing. Not their boy, just a boy, which is enough. Sugihara watches him and thinks, not for the first time, this is the dividend of disobedience. When the world forgets your name and then remembers it, which version do you answer to? 8. The world remembers. For years the story travels without him. It rides in the pockets of men to new continents, folded into the lining of women's coats, told at kitchen tables in cities that learn to pronounce Kaunas because gratitude teaches pronunciation. Names that once lined up outside a window now line up on family trees. Children carry middle names that sound like foreign rivers. The brush has become lineage, then letters. Thin paper that somehow weighs more than envelopes should. Dear Mr. Sugihara, they begin. And a past arrives in present tense. A man writes from Melbourne, trying not to be eloquent and failing beautifully. A woman writes from Toronto and encloses a photograph of 3 boys standing in a backyard with a dog that looks like a promise kept. A rabbi writes from Jerusalem and avoids metaphor, which makes the letter feel like prayer. Strangers come to the door, not as beggars now, but as witnesses. They stand on the stoop with their stories nervous in their hands. They tell him that a stamp became a ship, that a ship became a city, that a city learned their names, and their names learned how to be said by children who have never been hungry. They bow. He bows lower, embarrassed by the height of their gratitude. Titles trail them, Japan's Schindler. Shorthand people carry when ore is too large for a single language. He accepts the gesture and returns to the table, where tea cools the way memory does when handled gently. An invitation arrives with a special weight, Jerusalem, formal and warm. In the same sentence, he and Yukiko travel a route that feels like the corridor he once drew, in reverse, east to west, paper to presents. At Yad Vashem, trees hold their shade like dignitaries. He listens to names spoken without hurry. The ceremony gathers itself. The title is said aloud, righteous among the nations, and he feels the irony. Labels again, but this time merciful ones. When the applause begins, his instinct is to bow enough to escape it. He does not like being a center. Centers invite simplifications, and he knows how complicated mercy was in rooms where stamps lived. Yukiko touches his sleeve, an anchor disguised as affection. He lifts his eyes not to the crowd, but to a child perched on a father's shoulders in the back, what gratitude looks like when it cannot yet spell itself. Afterward, hands find him. Hands that once held passports now hold his fingers and refuse to let go. Someone tells the story of the train platform, and someone else adds the detail of the way the seal caught the light, and suddenly the past is theatre he never auditioned for and can barely watch. He listens. He does not correct. He understands that memory needs its own staging to keep breathing. There is a plaque. There is a certificate. There is a tree planted because trees keep secrets and make shade for people who have earned it. He stands beside it and thinks of the desk in Kaunas, wood to wood across time, and decides this is an honest symmetry. The world has found a way to answer without pretending the arithmetic ever balanced. Back in Japan, the mail multiplies. Photographs arrive with the stubborn joy of proof. He does not count. Counting feels like a violation of what was, then, a refusal to be procedural. He reads until reading becomes a kind of ache and then a relief. "Thank you for my life," one note says, penciled in handwriting that never learned how to be formal. He places it beside his old stamp and the pen he no longer uses, and feels the room shift, the past suddenly bearable. He is not remade by recognition. He is recontextualized. Selling bulbs and paying rent continue, rituals that keep humility from becoming performance. But when he walks down his street, he does so with the knowledge that a corridor drawn in ink did what corridors are supposed to do. It connected, and the connection endured. It is easy, later, to point to the applause and the medals and decide that memory prefers pageantry. But the truer drama is quieter. A man at a window, a line learning how to wait, a seal catching light, a child sleeping on a ship. The world remembers because some stories insist. They insist by living in the names of grandchildren. They insist by refusing to become legend without staying a ledger. How should a man receive a future that knocks, to thank him for the door he once refused to close? 9. The final signature. Hospitals are not built for epilogues. They are built for decisions. A narrow bed, a window that thinks in rectangles. The soft insistence of machines. He lies quietly, a man who once turned paper into corridors, now surrounded by papers of a different kind. Forms clipped to a board, the language of care written in numbers. On the table someone has placed a pen. It is not the old brush, not the brass seal that caught the light in Kaunas. Just a pen, ordinary, blue. Yukiko turns it once between her fingers and sets it down as if returning something to its element. Habit is a tenderness we offer each other when words grow large. The room gathers visitors who have learned reverence from their parents. A man steps in carrying the weight of 3 generations, his own, his children's, and the one that almost wasn't. He does not make a speech, he bows. Others come with photographs that have grown edges soft from being handled. They arrange gratitude on a small bedside table the way you arrange flowers, carefully enough to keep them breathing. He does not narrate himself. He never did. When asked, he will say the sentence that has become his measure of truth. They needed help. I did what had to be done. Even now, when breath chooses economy, the sentence fits. Yukiko squeezes his hand and the world is, for a moment, reduced to a pulse under skin, and 2 people who have shared more silence than most cities. Messages arrive from far places, the kind of distance that makes stamps tired. A letter uses a phrase he has grown uneasy with, Japan's Schindler, and he lets it pass not because he approves of comparisons, but because he understands they are bridges for people crossing into understanding. Titles are tools. Tools do not define the hand that used them. He dreams a little, trains inevitably. Platforms that lean away from him and then toward him like decisions. Names that return not as lists, but as weather. Voices in a line outside a window. The music of hope pressed into order. Memory spares him the arithmetic. It brings back the sound. The pen on the table waits. In a different story he would sit up, reach for it, sign one more name into safety. In this one, it is enough that the pen is present. Objects remember us. The old brush, somewhere in a drawer, holds the angle of his wrist. The seal, somewhere wrapped in cloth, holds the glint. The desk in Kaunas, if it still stands, holds a faint groove where a stamp met wood too many times. There is a son, now a man, who asks the last question sons ask when they become the age their fathers were when bravery visited. Did it matter as much as we think? He smiles, tired, precise, and answers as ever, without decoration. Yes, the word is light and heavy, as all simple truths are. When the breath eases and then lets go, the room remains, tea in a cup gone cool, photographs like small windows. Yukiko's hand on the railing, steady because steadiness is a way of honoring. Outside, a nurse moves down the hall, counting, rooms, pulses, tasks, unaware that history has shifted its weight by a gram. Elsewhere, the future keeps its appointments. A child lights Sabbath candles in a city that once existed only as a rumor on a form. A man walks his daughter to school and thinks, without saying it, that their name survived ink. A woman tells a story at a kitchen table, and a teenager rolls their eyes, as teenagers must, and then, years later, repeats the story to someone new because repetition is a form of reverence. In The Ledger That Mattered, his final entry was made years earlier, a corridor drawn, a refusal to refuse. Death does not erase the line, it confirms it. The boats keep moving, the stamps keep echoing, the nickname keeps travelling, clipped to a life that preferred nouns to praise. We like to imagine endings as signatures. Perhaps this one is different. Perhaps the last mark he made was in the lives that learned to write their own names because he wrote his. When history offers you a pen, who will you sign for?